They told her that leaders don't stutter, that command presence requires a voice that projects unwavering authority, not one that stumbles over syllables when lives hang in the balance. But when Lieutenant Kathy Morrison stood on the observation deck of Naval Air Station Pensacola that fog-shrouded morning in September, watching 200 sailors trapped on a rapidly sinking destroyer, her halting voice would become the steady beacon that guided every soul to safety through the chaos of twisted metal and rising waters. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The storm had arrived without warning, a Category 4 hurricane that meteorologists hadn't predicted would shift course so dramatically. What started as routine training exercises in the Gulf of Mexico became a fight for survival when Hurricane Elena's unexpected turn sent 40-foot waves crashing into the USS Challenger during what should have been a calm weather navigation drill. Kathy had been observing from the Coastal Operations Center, her assignment relegated to monitoring communications traffic and filing routine reports. At 26, she possessed one of the sharpest tactical minds to emerge from the Naval Academy in a decade, but her speech impediment had consistently placed her in administrative roles that kept her away from the kind of command decisions that define military careers. The irony wasn't lost on her colleagues. Catherine Elizabeth Morrison had graduated summa cum laude with degrees in naval strategy and crisis management. Her thesis on emergency evacuation procedures under extreme weather conditions had been published in 3 military journals and was considered required reading for advanced tactical courses. Yet when promotion boards reviewed her file, they inevitably focused on the same concern that had followed her through 4 years of academy training and 2 years of active duty. Leaders need voices that inspire confidence under pressure. Kathy's stutter wasn't severe by clinical standards. During casual conversations, it manifested as occasional hesitation, a slight repetition of consonants that most civilians would barely notice. But military tradition valued decisive communication, the ability to bark orders that cut through chaos and confusion with crystalline clarity. Her speech pattern, however mild, represented what senior officers considered a fundamental incompatibility with command authority. The morning of September 15th started like every other day at Pensacola. Kathy arrived at the operations center before dawn, her routine unchanged by years of predictable assignments that utilized her analytical capabilities while avoiding situations requiring verbal leadership. She reviewed overnight communications traffic, updated situation boards with information from fleet exercises occurring throughout the Gulf region, and prepared briefing materials that other officers would present to command staff. The weather forecast had shown Hurricane Elena maintaining its projected northward trajectory, passing well east of the training areas where multiple naval vessels were conducting coordinated exercises. The storm represented no immediate threat to operations, though meteorologists continued monitoring its path with the cautious attention that Gulf Coast weather demands during hurricane season. Kathy's workstation in the communications center provided access to multiple data streams that painted comprehensive pictures of naval activities across thousands of square miles of ocean. Her security clearance allowed her to monitor operational traffic from exercises involving submarine warfare, surface combat tactics, and aviation coordination scenarios that tested crew readiness under simulated combat conditions. From her position, she could observe the intricate choreography of modern naval operations. Ships moved in precise formations, while aircraft conducted reconnaissance patterns that gathered intelligence about imaginary enemy positions. Submarines practiced stealth approaches that would remain undetected by surface vessels using the most advanced sonar technology available to the fleet. The USS Challenger, a guided missile destroyer with a crew of 200, was participating in a navigation exercise designed to test seamanship skills under challenging but manageable weather conditions. Captain Robert Hayes commanded the vessel with the confidence that came from 15 years of destroyer operations and 3 previous deployments to regions where naval expertise meant the difference between mission success and strategic failure. Kathy monitored the Challenger's progress through routine communications that indicated normal exercise parameters. The ship maintained proper position relative to other vessels in the training group, executed navigation orders with precision that reflected excellent crew training, and reported weather conditions that remained within acceptable limits for continued operations. At 6:30 hours, Elena's behavior changed with the suddenness that makes hurricanes among nature's most unpredictable phenomena. Satellite imagery showed the storm's eye wall tightening while its forward speed increased dramatically. More critically, Elena's track shifted 30 degrees westward, placing it on a collision course with the exercise area where 8 naval vessels were conducting operations in waters that would become impossibly dangerous within hours. The first indication of trouble came through routine weather updates that showed wind speeds increasing beyond forecast parameters. What meteorologists had predicted as a distant storm maintaining safe separation from training areas was rapidly becoming an immediate threat to vessels operating in exposed waters with limited options for emergency shelter. Kathy watched the developing situation through multiple information sources that painted an increasingly alarming picture. Weather reconnaissance aircraft reported wave heights growing from manageable swells to mountainous walls of water that would challenge the seaworthiness of any vessel caught in the storm's path. Wind measurements exceeded hurricane force as Elena's intensification continued at rates that defied previous modeling predictions. The Challenger's position placed it directly on Elena's projected path with insufficient time to reach protected waters before the storm's arrival. Captain Hayes faced a command decision that required choosing between immediate evacuation to safer areas or continuing the exercise while hoping Elena would weaken or change course before reaching dangerous proximity to his vessel. Naval regulations provided clear guidance for hurricane avoidance, but Elena's unexpected behavior had created a situation where standard procedures offered no viable options. The destroyer could attempt high-speed transit toward the nearest protected harbor, but Elena's accelerating approach made successful evacuation uncertain. Alternatively, the ship could maintain position while preparing for storm survival, accepting the risks associated with riding out hurricane conditions in open water. Hayes chose to implement storm survival procedures while maintaining communication with Fleet Command about evacuation possibilities. His crew began securing equipment, reinforcing critical systems, and preparing for conditions that would test every aspect of their seamanship training and the Challenger's structural integrity. Kathy observed the unfolding crisis through communications traffic that revealed the complexity of decisions facing multiple commanders simultaneously. 8 ships needed coordination to avoid collision during emergency maneuvering, while weather conditions deteriorated rapidly enough to make any movement increasingly dangerous. At 8:47 hours, Elena struck the Challenger with fury that exceeded every survival scenario the crew had trained to handle. Waves measuring 60 feet crashed over the destroyer's structure, while winds approaching 150 miles per hour created forces that stressed the ship's framework beyond design specifications. The Challenger's hull, engineered to withstand combat damage and extreme weather, began showing stress fractures as Elena's power exceeded the limits of human engineering. What started as manageable storm conditions became a fight for survival against natural forces that transformed a state-of-the-art destroyer into a helpless victim of oceanic violence. Captain Hayes transmitted the first distress signal at 8:52 hours, his message barely audible through static caused by Elena's electromagnetic interference. The Challenger was taking on water through hull breaches that emergency repair teams couldn't contain while maintaining structural integrity against waves that struck with the force of artillery shells. Kathy listened to Hayes's increasingly desperate communications as Elena's assault continued with relentless intensity. The destroyer's engines were failing, its navigation systems had been damaged by electrical surges, and flooding in critical compartments threatened the ship's stability in ways that made immediate evacuation the only option for crew survival. The tragedy unfolding in the Gulf of Mexico would test every aspect of Kathy's training and experience, while challenging assumptions about leadership that had shaped her entire military career. 200 sailors faced death in waters that had become a liquid hell of wind and waves, and their survival would depend on decisions made by someone whose voice had been deemed unfit for command authority. Elena's fury had created a crisis that would demand excellence from personnel whose qualifications transcended traditional expectations about what constituted leadership under pressure. The storm would reveal whether true command presence emerged from the confidence of a clear voice or the courage to speak truth that could guide others through darkness toward safety that existed only if someone possessed the strength to give orders that others would trust with their lives. Kathy Morrison's path to Naval Air Station Pensacola began in the farmlands of Nebraska, where her childhood was shaped by the contrast between her brilliant mind and the speech impediment that made simple conversations feel like navigating a minefield. Growing up in the small town of Cedar Rapids, population 3,200, she was the daughter of Thomas Morrison, a high school mathematics teacher, and Linda Morrison, who managed the town's only bookstore. The Morrison household valued intellectual achievement above all else. Thomas had served briefly in the Navy during the Vietnam era, working as a communications technician aboard supply vessels that never saw combat, but gave him deep respect for military precision and dedication. Linda possessed a master's degree in literature from the University of Nebraska and had chosen small-town life deliberately, believing that rural communities offered children opportunities for individual attention that larger cities couldn't provide. Kathy's stutter first manifested during her elementary school years, appearing gradually as academic pressure increased and social expectations demanded more verbal participation in classroom activities. Her teachers quickly recognized her exceptional intellectual capabilities, but her speech difficulties created challenges that required creative solutions and extraordinary patience from educators who weren't trained to handle such complex combinations of giftedness and communication barriers. During middle school, Kathy discovered that her stutter disappeared almost completely when she focused intensely on subjects that captured her imagination. Mathematics, science, and particularly strategic games like chess allowed her to communicate with fluency that amazed teachers who had grown accustomed to her hesitant speech during routine classroom interactions. This pattern established a foundation that would define her approach to challenges throughout her life. When Kathy engaged with problems that demanded analytical thinking and systematic solutions, her mind operated with clarity that transcended the anxiety-driven speech patterns that plagued her during casual social situations. Her brain seemed wired to function optimally under pressure, despite the surface appearance of communication difficulties. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. High school brought new challenges as Kathy's academic excellence attracted attention from college recruiters, while her speech impediment continued to create barriers in social situations that relied heavily on verbal interaction. She excelled in advanced placement courses, particularly in subjects requiring mathematical reasoning and logical analysis, but struggled with oral presentations that counted significantly toward final grades in English and social studies classes. Her parents sought help from speech therapists who provided techniques for managing stuttering episodes, but the fundamental pattern remained unchanged. Kathy's communication difficulties were most pronounced during situations involving social evaluation or performance anxiety, while her speech flowed naturally when she focused on problem-solving activities that engaged her analytical capabilities. The decision to pursue military service came during Kathy's junior year when a Navy recruiter visited Cedar Rapids High School to discuss opportunities for academically gifted students. Commander Sarah Phillips, herself a Naval Academy graduate, recognized something exceptional in Kathy's questions about naval strategy and operational planning that went far beyond typical teenage interest in military careers. Phillips arranged for Kathy to visit the Naval Academy during her senior year, providing exposure to military culture and academic rigor that would define her college experience. During that visit, Kathy witnessed naval exercises that demonstrated the complexity of modern maritime operations and the intellectual challenges involved in coordinating multiple vessels and aircraft in dangerous environments. The Academy's admissions process proved both challenging and revealing. Kathy's academic credentials were exceptional, placing her among the top 1% of applicants nationwide. Her essays on leadership and military strategy demonstrated sophisticated understanding of complex strategic concepts that impressed admissions committees. However, her speech impediment became a significant concern during oral interviews that were designed to evaluate leadership potential and communication skills. Captain David Chen, who conducted Kathy's final admissions interview, later recalled being struck by the disconnect between her obvious intellectual capabilities and her communication difficulties. During portions of the interview focused on strategic analysis and problem-solving scenarios, Kathy's speech flowed with remarkable clarity and confidence. But when questions shifted to leadership experiences and social interactions, her stutter returned with intensity that seemed to undermine her otherwise impressive qualifications. The Academy's decision to admit Kathy reflected institutional recognition that intellectual excellence and leadership potential might manifest in forms that didn't conform to traditional expectations about military bearing and communication style. Her acceptance came with the understanding that her unique combination of strengths and challenges would require creative approaches to officer development and career planning. Plebe year at the Naval Academy tested every aspect of Kathy's resilience and determination. The military environment demanded verbal responses delivered with precision and authority that her speech impediment made difficult to achieve consistently. Upper-class midshipmen who conducted training exercises and discipline sessions quickly identified her stutter as a vulnerability that could be exploited during stress-inducing activities designed to test character under pressure. However, Kathy's academic performance exceeded expectations in ways that earned respect from instructors and classmates who recognized extraordinary intellectual capability disguised beneath communication difficulties. Her understanding of naval tactics, strategic planning, and crisis management demonstrated depth that surpassed many midshipmen who possessed natural leadership presence but lacked comparable analytical skills. During navigation exercises conducted on Chesapeake Bay, Kathy consistently demonstrated exceptional seamanship and tactical awareness that impressed senior officers responsible for evaluating midshipman performance. Her ability to analyze complex maritime situations and develop effective solutions exceeded the capabilities of classmates who appeared more confident in leadership roles but lacked her systematic approach to problem-solving under pressure. The contradiction between Kathy's obvious competence and her speech-related challenges created ongoing debates among Academy faculty about how to evaluate officer potential in candidates whose strengths and weaknesses didn't fit conventional assessment categories. Some instructors advocated for focusing on her exceptional analytical abilities while providing additional support for communication skill development. Others argued that military leadership required verbal authority that her stutter would always compromise, regardless of her other qualifications. Professor Margaret Stevens, who taught advanced naval strategy courses, became one of Kathy's strongest advocates within the Academy's faculty. Stevens recognized that Kathy's approach to strategic analysis revealed understanding of complex military concepts that exceeded graduate-level comprehension in many cases. Her written work demonstrated mastery of strategic thinking that would be valuable for any naval officer, regardless of traditional leadership presentations. Stevens arranged for Kathy to participate in advanced research projects that utilized her analytical capabilities while minimizing the verbal presentation requirements that created barriers in other academic contexts. These opportunities allowed Kathy to develop expertise in crisis management and emergency response planning that would prove crucial during her later naval career. During summer training assignments, Kathy rotated through various naval installations where she gained exposure to different aspects of maritime operations. Her assignments to communication centers revealed a natural aptitude for understanding complex information systems and coordinating multiple data streams that painted comprehensive pictures of naval activities across wide geographical areas. At Naval Station Norfolk, Kathy worked with experienced petty officers who taught her the practical aspects of naval communications that complemented her theoretical knowledge from Academy coursework. Chief Petty Officer Robert Martinez, a 20-year veteran of destroyer operations, recognized capabilities in Kathy that transcended her apparent communication limitations. Martinez observed that Kathy's stutter virtually disappeared when she focused on technical procedures and operational requirements that demanded precise attention to detail. During equipment training and system troubleshooting exercises, her communication became clear and confident, suggesting that her speech difficulties were primarily anxiety-related rather than fundamental impediments to effective verbal interaction. The summer assignment at Norfolk also exposed Kathy to the realities of naval operations during crisis situations. She witnessed emergency response procedures during a major storm that threatened multiple vessels in Hampton Roads, observing how experienced officers coordinated complex evacuation and damage control operations that required split-second decision-making and clear communication under extreme pressure. These experiences reinforced Kathy's understanding that effective naval leadership involved much more than traditional command presence and verbal authority. The most successful officers, she observed, possessed analytical capabilities, technical expertise, and calm decision-making abilities that enabled them to function effectively during chaotic situations where conventional leadership approaches proved inadequate. Senior year at the Academy brought increased focus on career specialization and officer assignments that would define the early years of Kathy's naval service. Her academic record placed her among the top graduates in her class, but her speech impediment continued to influence career counseling discussions about appropriate specialization areas and duty assignments. Captain William Foster, Kathy's senior advisor, struggled with recommendations that balanced her exceptional qualifications against institutional concerns about placing officers with communication difficulties in positions requiring traditional leadership responsibilities. Foster recognized that Kathy possessed strategic thinking abilities that could benefit the Navy significantly, but military culture emphasized verbal command presence that her stutter seemed to compromise. The solution emerged through discussions with officers who had observed Kathy's performance during practical training exercises. Several instructors noted that her communication difficulties diminished significantly during high-pressure situations that required focused problem-solving and systematic analysis. This pattern suggested that her optimal performance occurred precisely during the crisis conditions where effective naval leadership proved most crucial. Foster recommended Kathy for assignment to positions that would utilize her analytical capabilities while providing opportunities to develop leadership skills in environments that minimize traditional verbal command requirements. This approach represented an innovative attempt to optimize officer development for personnel whose strengths didn't conform to conventional leadership models. Graduation from the Naval Academy represented both achievement and uncertainty for Kathy. Her academic excellence earned recognition through multiple awards and honors that acknowledged exceptional performance throughout 4 years of demanding coursework. However, her speech impediment remained a characteristic that would influence career opportunities and advancement potential throughout her naval service. The assignment to Naval Air Station Pensacola reflected institutional compromise between Kathy's obvious capabilities and traditional concerns about placing officers with communication difficulties in high-visibility leadership positions. Pensacola offered opportunities for professional development in communications and operations coordination while avoiding the direct command responsibilities that military culture associated with traditional officer career progression. Kathy approached her new assignment with determination to prove that effective leadership could manifest in forms that transcended conventional expectations about command presence and verbal authority. Her experiences at the Academy had taught her that military effectiveness depended on competence and dedication rather than surface characteristics that impressed evaluation boards but didn't necessarily translate into operational excellence. The Gulf Coast environment of Pensacola provided the setting where Kathy's unique combination of intellectual excellence and communication challenges would be tested under conditions that demanded the highest levels of professional competence and personal courage. Her assignment to the Operations Center placed her in position to observe and participate in naval activities that would prepare her for the moment when her true leadership capabilities would be revealed through performance that exceeded every expectation about what constituted command authority under pressure. Commander James Reynolds arrived at Naval Air Station Pensacola in January with the kind of polished confidence that came from 15 years of carefully orchestrated career moves designed to maximize advancement potential while minimizing exposure to genuine operational risks. His service record gleamed with prestigious shore assignments, Pentagon tours, and administrative positions that looked impressive on promotion boards but provided little practical experience with the life-and-death decisions that defined effective naval leadership. Reynolds possessed an MBA from Georgetown University, earned during a comfortable assignment to the Navy's Strategic Planning Division, and spoke fluent bureaucratic language that impressed senior officers who valued academic credentials over operational competence. His uniform displayed ribbons from various ceremonial assignments and training programs, creating an appearance of extensive military experience that masked his complete lack of combat leadership or crisis management under actual pressure. The new operations director position gave Reynolds authority over all communications and coordination activities at Pensacola, including oversight of personnel assignments and performance evaluations that would determine career advancement for officers under his command. His arrival coincided with Navy-wide initiatives to streamline operations and eliminate personnel whose capabilities didn't align with traditional leadership expectations. Reynolds' first encounter with Kathy occurred during a staff meeting designed to establish his authority and introduce new operational procedures that would emphasize efficiency and standardization. As department heads presented briefings on their respective areas of responsibility, Reynolds observed each officer with the calculating attention of someone evaluating assets and liabilities according to predetermined criteria. When Kathy's turn came to brief on communications coordination activities, her stutter manifested with the intensity that always accompanied formal presentations before unfamiliar superiors. Her technical knowledge remained exceptional, and her understanding of operational requirements exceeded that of officers with twice her experience. But her speech difficulties provided Reynolds with exactly the vulnerability he sought to establish his dominance over the department. "Interesting presentation style," Reynolds commented, his tone carrying undertones that made his meaning unmistakable to everyone present. "In my experience, effective communication requires clarity and confidence that inspires trust during critical situations. Perhaps we should review our standards for personnel assigned to positions requiring verbal coordination under pressure." The assembled officers shifted uncomfortably as Reynolds' implications became clear. He was establishing Kathy's speech impediment as grounds for questioning not just her current performance, but her fundamental suitability for any role involving communication responsibilities. His approach was sophisticated enough to avoid explicit discrimination, while creating an atmosphere where her stutter became viewed as a professional liability rather than a manageable personal characteristic. Over the following weeks, Reynolds implemented changes that systematically marginalized Kathy's contributions to operational planning and crisis response preparation. Her detailed analyses of regional weather patterns and hurricane preparedness protocols were dismissed as overly complex for practical implementation. Her recommendations for improving communication redundancy during emergency situations were rejected as theoretical exercises that didn't address real-world operational requirements. Reynolds redirected Kathy's assignments toward administrative duties that minimized her interaction with operational personnel and eliminated her participation in briefings where her speech difficulties might undermine his narrative about communication standards. She found herself compiling statistical reports that no one read, updating procedural manuals that were never implemented, and performing clerical tasks that any enlisted personnel could have handled more efficiently. The systematic nature of Reynolds' campaign became apparent to observant colleagues who recognized the disconnect between Kathy's obvious competence and her increasingly marginalized role within the operations center. Lieutenant Commander Patricia Walsh, a seasoned pilot with combat experience in the Persian Gulf, had worked with Kathy on several tactical planning exercises and understood that her analytical capabilities far exceeded her apparent limitations. Walsh began documenting instances where Reynolds' personnel decisions seemed based on personal bias rather than operational effectiveness. During a complex training exercise involving multiple aircraft squadrons and surface vessels, Reynolds assigned Kathy to inventory duties that prevented her participation in coordination activities where her expertise would have been valuable. The exercise experienced communication failures that Kathy's planning had anticipated and addressed in recommendations that Reynolds had dismissed without consideration. "There's something wrong with how Reynolds is handling Morrison," Walsh confided to Commander Michael Torres, the base's senior flight operations officer. "She knows more about regional weather patterns and emergency coordination than anyone in the department, but he's got her filing paperwork while we struggle with problems she already solved." Torres had observed similar patterns in Reynolds' treatment of other personnel whose capabilities didn't conform to his narrow definitions of military bearing and leadership potential. The new operations director seemed more concerned with appearance and protocol than with actual operational effectiveness, creating an environment where perception mattered more than performance. Reynolds' approach to undermining Kathy's credibility involved highlighting her speech difficulties during situations where verbal communication was emphasized over technical competence. He scheduled her for briefings during high-visibility meetings where her stutter would be most noticeable, then used her communication challenges as justification for reducing her responsibilities in areas where her expertise was most valuable. During a regional conference on hurricane preparation attended by senior officers from throughout the Gulf Coast region, Reynolds arranged for Kathy to present preliminary findings from her research on emergency evacuation procedures. Her presentation contained groundbreaking analyses of coordination failures during previous hurricane responses, but her speech difficulties overshadowed the content's importance as Reynolds had calculated. As you can observe, Reynolds commented, communication clarity becomes critically important during emergency situations where confusion can result in casualties. We must ensure that our personnel assignments reflect capabilities that match the verbal demands of crisis coordination. The implication was clear to everyone present. Reynolds was using Kathy's stutter to justify personnel policies that would exclude anyone with speech difficulties from positions requiring emergency communication, regardless of their other qualifications. His comments carried the weight of institutional authority while appearing to address legitimate operational concerns.
Kathy endured these attacks with remarkable composure, maintaining professional behavior despite the obvious injustice of Reynolds' treatment. Her responses to his criticisms demonstrated deep understanding of communication principles and emergency coordination requirements, but her speech impediment provided him with convenient justification for dismissing her input as impractical for operational implementation. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, a communications specialist who worked closely with Kathy on equipment maintenance and system optimization, began recognizing patterns in Reynolds' behavior that suggested deliberate harassment rather than legitimate performance concerns. Chen observed that Kathy's technical modifications to communication systems consistently improved reliability and effectiveness, yet Reynolds never acknowledged these improvements or allowed them to influence personnel evaluations. Morrison fixed the frequency interference problem that was affecting our coordination with offshore vessels, Chen reported to Walsh during a private conversation. She spent 3 days analyzing signal patterns and equipment configurations, then implemented modifications that solved issues our technicians couldn't figure out. But Reynolds acts like she's incompetent because she stammers during briefings. Chen's observations revealed the fundamental disconnect between Reynolds' narrative about Kathy's limitations and her actual contributions to operational effectiveness. While he emphasized her speech difficulties during formal presentations, he ignored her exceptional performance in technical areas that directly impacted mission success and personnel safety. The pattern of Reynolds' harassment intensified as Kathy's analytical work continued to demonstrate capabilities that contradicted his assessment of her professional value. Her weather analysis correctly predicted several storm systems that threatened training operations, allowing for preventive measures that avoided potential disasters. Her communication protocol recommendations improved coordination efficiency during complex exercises involving multiple units and geographical areas. Yet Reynolds systematically excluded Kathy from recognition or advancement opportunities that would have been automatic for officers with comparable achievements but without speech impediments. He assigned her to duties during professional development conferences, preventing attendance at training programs that could have enhanced her qualifications. He scheduled her for equipment maintenance during briefings where visiting experts discussed advanced coordination techniques relevant to her expertise. Master Chief Robert Sullivan, the senior enlisted advisor with 30 years of naval experience, began questioning Reynolds' personnel management decisions as their impact on operational readiness became apparent. Sullivan had served under numerous officers during his career and recognized the difference between leaders who maximized their personnel's capabilities and those who allowed personal bias to compromise mission effectiveness. Commander Reynolds is wasting talent, Sullivan confided to Torres during a maintenance inspection. Lieutenant Morrison knows more about emergency coordination than most senior officers I've worked with, but he's got her doing clerical work while we struggle with communication problems she could solve. Sullivan's concerns reflected growing unease among experienced personnel who understood that effective military operations required utilizing every available capability, regardless of personal characteristics that had no bearing on technical competence or operational performance. Reynolds' treatment of Kathy represented a waste of military assets that could prove costly during actual emergencies. The Operations Center's performance metrics began reflecting the impact of Reynolds' personnel management approach. Communication coordination during training exercises showed declining efficiency as Kathy's expertise was excluded from planning and implementation processes. Emergency response protocols suffered from lack of the detailed analysis that her research provided. Weather preparation procedures relied on standard protocols rather than the enhanced forecasting capabilities that her work had developed. Reynolds interpreted these declining metrics as justification for more stringent personnel standards, rather than recognition that his exclusion of qualified personnel was compromising operational effectiveness. His focus on appearance and traditional leadership presentations blinded him to the practical consequences of marginalizing officers whose capabilities exceeded conventional expectations. The breaking point in Reynolds' campaign against Kathy came during a routine training exercise that revealed the full extent of his professional incompetence and personal cruelty. The exercise involved coordinating multiple aircraft and surface vessels during simulated emergency conditions, exactly the type of complex operation where Kathy's analytical capabilities and coordination expertise would prove most valuable. Reynolds assigned Kathy to administrative duties that prevented her participation in the exercise planning or execution, despite her detailed research on the geographical area and weather patterns that would affect the operation. He then struggled with coordination challenges that her analysis had anticipated and addressed in recommendations that he had dismissed without consideration. When communication failures during the exercise resulted in a minor collision between two training aircraft, Reynolds attempted to blame inadequate personnel rather than acknowledging his own failure to utilize available expertise. His post-exercise briefing emphasized the need for higher communication standards while ignoring the fact that Kathy's excluded recommendations would have prevented the incident entirely. Lieutenant Commander Walsh documented the exercise failures and their relationship to Reynolds' personnel decisions, building a case that would eventually expose his systematic harassment of qualified personnel based on personal bias rather than operational requirements. Her evidence showed clear patterns of waste and mismanagement that compromised mission effectiveness while advancing Reynolds' career through the appearance of strict standards and professional rigor. As hurricane season approached the Gulf Coast, Reynolds' marginalization of Kathy's weather expertise and emergency coordination capabilities created vulnerabilities that would prove catastrophic when actual crisis conditions demanded the highest levels of professional competence and technical knowledge. His campaign against her represented not just personal cruelty, but institutional failure that threatened to cost lives when nature's fury would test every aspect of their operational readiness. The stage was set for confrontation between Reynolds' prejudice-based leadership and the reality that effective crisis response required capabilities that transcended traditional expectations about command presence and verbal authority. Hurricane Elena's approach would reveal whether institutional bias or operational competence would prevail when 200 lives depended on decisions made by officers whose qualifications extended far beyond the surface characteristics that Reynolds had used to define military leadership. While Commander Reynolds continued his systematic campaign to marginalize Kathy's contributions, a growing network of observant personnel began recognizing capabilities that extended far beyond what her service record officially documented. These discoveries emerged through chance encounters, routine interactions, and careful attention to details that revealed expertise inconsistent with someone assigned to administrative duties at a regional training facility. Lieutenant Commander Patricia Walsh's investigation into Kathy's background began with simple curiosity about the disconnect between her obvious competence and her limited assignments. Walsh possessed security clearances that allowed access to personnel records and training databases unavailable to most base personnel, and her inquiries revealed gaps and inconsistencies that raised intriguing questions about Kathy's actual experience and qualifications. The first anomaly appeared in Kathy's equipment certifications, which included qualifications for communication systems not deployed at Pensacola or most other standard naval installations. Her training records showed completion of advanced courses in crisis coordination and emergency response management that typically required years of operational experience to access. Most puzzling were references to specialized programs that Walsh couldn't identify despite her extensive knowledge of naval training pipelines. Walsh's background as a combat pilot provided perspective on military career patterns that helped her recognize when personnel files didn't tell complete stories. Officers with Kathy's certifications typically served in high-visibility assignments that utilized their specialized knowledge, yet her assignment history showed only routine positions that seemed to waste her documented capabilities.
There's something unusual about Morrison's background, Walsh explained to Commander Torres during a secure conversation in his office. Her training record includes programs I've never heard of, and her certifications exceed what anyone would need for communications work at a training base. Either there's been a major administrative error, or her assignment here serves purposes we're not authorized to understand. Torres had been conducting his own informal investigation after observing Kathy's performance during flight operations coordination. His 22 years of naval aviation experience had taught him to recognize when personnel possessed capabilities that exceeded their apparent roles, and Kathy's understanding of complex air traffic management suggested background in operations far more sophisticated than regional training exercises. During a particularly challenging weather situation that grounded most aircraft while allowing limited flight operations, Torres observed Kathy coordinating air traffic with efficiency that impressed controllers with decades of experience. Her ability to track multiple aircraft simultaneously while managing changing weather conditions and safety protocols demonstrated skills that exceeded standard qualifications for communications personnel. She managed 7 aircraft through deteriorating weather conditions with precision I've rarely seen, Torres reported to Walsh. Her coordination kept everyone safe while maintaining training schedules that would have been canceled under normal circumstances. That level of capability doesn't develop through routine assignments. Master Chief Sullivan's observations focused on Kathy's technical knowledge and equipment expertise, areas where his 30 years of experience provided insight into what constituted normal versus exceptional competence. During routine maintenance inspections, Sullivan noticed that Kathy's equipment modifications consistently improved performance beyond manufacturer specifications while maintaining complete compliance with safety protocols. Her understanding of complex electronic systems exceeded what most officers learned through standard training programs. She could diagnose equipment problems that stumped senior technicians and implement solutions that suggested extensive experience with advanced technology under demanding operational conditions. Most intriguingly, her modifications often involve techniques not covered in official technical manuals. Sullivan's investigation into Kathy's technical background revealed training documentation for systems that weren't supposed to exist at their classification level. Her certifications included programs typically reserved for personnel assigned to specialized units operating equipment above standard naval inventory. The disconnect between her documented qualifications and her current assignment suggested involvement in operations that remained actively classified. Lieutenant Sarah Chen's daily interactions with Kathy provided insights into capabilities that manifested during routine technical discussions and problem-solving activities. Chen observed that Kathy's speech patterns changed dramatically when focused on complex operational challenges, transforming from hesitant communication during social interactions to clear, confident analysis during technical conversations. During equipment troubleshooting sessions, Kathy demonstrated understanding of signal propagation theory, frequency management, and communication protocols that exceeded advanced engineering coursework. Her explanations of technical concepts revealed depth of knowledge that suggested hands-on experience with systems and situations not available through standard naval service. When Morrison focuses on technical problems, Chen explained to Walsh during a private meeting, her stutter disappears completely, and she explains complex concepts with clarity that makes everything seem obvious. Yesterday, she solved a frequency interference issue that our best technicians couldn't figure out, and she did it like it was routine maintenance.
Chen's observations revealed patterns that suggested Kathy's speech difficulties were primarily anxiety-related responses to social evaluation rather than fundamental communication impairments. During technical discussions where her expertise was relevant, her communication became natural and authoritative, indicating that her stutter represented manageable stress responses rather than permanent limitations on her verbal capabilities. The breakthrough in understanding Kathy's background came when Walsh's security clearance allowed her to access classified personnel databases that contained information about specialized programs and assignments not included in standard service records. Her queries triggered security protocols that required additional authorization, suggesting that further information about Kathy's background involved operations above Walsh's current clearance level. The response to Walsh's inquiries came through unofficial channels that indicated institutional awareness of her investigation. Commander Helen Martinez, a senior intelligence officer with connections throughout the Naval Special Operations community, arranged a discreet meeting that would provide context for understanding Kathy's unusual qualifications and assignment pattern. Lieutenant Morrison's background involves operations that officially don't exist, Martinez explained. Her assignment to Pensacola represents protective placement designed to provide recovery time while maintaining readiness for situations that might require her specialized capabilities. Her speech impediment provides perfect cover for someone whose true identity needs protection. Martinez's revelation transformed Walsh's understanding of everything she had observed about Kathy's performance and Reynolds's treatment of her. Rather than being an officer with communication difficulties limiting her career potential, Kathy was specialized personnel whose speech impediment served as operational camouflage while she maintained capabilities that might prove essential during crisis situations. The intelligence briefing revealed that Kathy's naval career included assignments to classified programs involving crisis coordination under extreme conditions. Her expertise in emergency response and communication management reflected experience with operations where failure resulted in casualties measured in hundreds rather than the minor equipment damage that characterized routine training exercises. Her speech impediment hadn't prevented advancement in specialized roles. It had provided ideal cover for someone whose real qualifications would attract unwanted attention from foreign intelligence services or domestic personnel seeking to exploit classified capabilities for personal advancement. Walsh's network of concerned officers expanded to personnel whose positions provided different perspectives on Kathy's unusual qualifications and performance patterns. Chief Petty Officer Michael Rodriguez, responsible for communications equipment maintenance, had documented numerous instances where Kathy's technical modifications exceeded standard procedures while achieving performance improvements that suggested access to classified enhancement techniques. Rodriguez's technical background allowed him to recognize when equipment modifications involved knowledge not available through normal training channels. Kathy's adjustments often incorporated techniques that appeared in classified technical bulletins restricted to personnel with specialized clearances. Yet her official assignment provided no apparent access to such information. "Morrison knows things about our equipment that aren't in any manual I've seen," Rodriguez reported to Sullivan during a maintenance review. Her modifications consistently improve performance using techniques that seem to come from operational experience with advanced systems. Either she's some kind of technical genius, or her background includes assignments we're not cleared to know about. The pattern of observations from multiple sources created a comprehensive picture of someone whose actual capabilities remained hidden beneath carefully maintained operational security. Kathy's assignment to routine communications duties at Pensacola represented sophisticated cover that allowed her to maintain specialized skills while avoiding the visibility that would compromise her usefulness for classified operations. Lieutenant Jennifer Park, a meteorologist assigned to weather forecasting duties, had observed Kathy's hurricane analysis capabilities during routine briefing preparations. Park possessed advanced degrees in atmospheric science and recognized that Kathy's weather prediction techniques incorporated modeling approaches not taught in standard military meteorology programs.
During informal discussions about approaching storm systems, Kathy demonstrated understanding of hurricane behavior and forecasting methodologies that exceeded graduate-level academic training.
Her predictions consistently proved more accurate than official forecasts, and her analysis included factors that weren't considered in standard weather evaluation protocols. Morrison predicted Hurricane Elena's path change 3 days before official forecasts acknowledged the possibility, Park reported to Torres during a weather briefing review. Her analysis incorporated atmospheric pressure variations and ocean temperature patterns that required access to data sources I didn't know existed. When I asked about her methodology, she provided explanations that sounded like classified research from advanced weather warfare programs. Park's observations suggested that Kathy's weather expertise reflected experience with operations where atmospheric prediction accuracy could determine mission success or failure under conditions where standard forecasting proved inadequate. Her knowledge appeared to derive from classified programs involving weather-dependent operations requiring precision that exceeded civilian or routine military requirements. The accumulating evidence from multiple observers painted a picture of someone whose specialized background remained hidden beneath assignment patterns designed to provide cover while maintaining operational readiness. Reynolds' systematic harassment represented more than simple discrimination. It constituted potential sabotage of military assets that might prove essential during crisis situations requiring capabilities that exceeded normal institutional resources. Commander Torres organized discreet meetings among the officers who had been documenting their observations, creating an informal network focused on understanding and protecting Kathy's actual value to naval operations. Their collective evidence revealed systematic patterns that confirmed Martinez's intelligence briefing about Kathy's classified background and specialized capabilities. We're dealing with someone whose real qualifications remain classified above our security levels, Torres explained to the assembled group. Reynolds' treatment of Morrison represents not just harassment of a subordinate, but potential compromise of operational capabilities that we're not authorized to fully understand. Our responsibility is to document his actions and protect her readiness for whatever missions her real assignment involves. The network's documentation efforts focused on preserving evidence of Kathy's exceptional performance, while Reynolds systematically excluded her from opportunities to demonstrate her capabilities. Their files contained detailed records of technical achievements, operational successes, and problem-solving demonstrations that contradicted every aspect of Reynolds' narrative about her professional limitations. As hurricane season intensified in the Gulf of Mexico, the observers' understanding of Kathy's hidden capabilities took on urgent significance. Weather patterns indicated the possibility of major storm activity that could threaten regional naval operations, exactly the type of crisis situation where her specialized expertise might prove essential for coordinating emergency response operations under conditions that would challenge conventional leadership approaches. The stage was set for revelation of capabilities that had remained concealed beneath operational security requirements and Reynolds' prejudice-based leadership. Hurricane Elena's approach toward the Gulf Coast would create conditions demanding exactly the type of specialized crisis coordination that Kathy's classified background had prepared her to handle, while Reynolds' systematic marginalization of her expertise threatened to waste military assets during the moment when they would prove most crucial for saving lives. At 06:15 hours on September 15th, the National Hurricane Center issued an emergency bulletin that would transform routine training operations into a life-and-death struggle against nature's most destructive forces. Hurricane Elena, previously tracking safely east of all naval exercise areas, had undergone rapid intensification while simultaneously shifting course 37 degrees westward, placing it on a direct collision path with the USS Challenger and 7 other vessels conducting coordinated maneuvers in the Gulf of Mexico. The meteorological data arriving at Pensacola's operations center painted a picture of unprecedented hurricane development that defied every predictive model in use by the National Weather Service. Elena's wind speeds had increased from Category 2 to Category 4 in less than 6 hours, while its forward velocity nearly doubled, creating a convergence of factors that gave naval commanders minimal time to implement emergency procedures designed for gradual storm approach scenarios. Commander Reynolds received the alert during his morning briefing review, and his immediate response revealed the limitations of his administrative background when confronted with genuine crisis management requirements. His first instinct was to follow standard hurricane protocols that assumed adequate warning time for orderly evacuation procedures. But Elena's accelerated timeline made conventional responses inadequate for the situation's actual demands. Implement standard storm evacuation procedures for all vessels in the exercise area, Reynolds ordered, apparently unaware that Elena's approach speed had already eliminated the time window necessary for safe withdrawal to protected harbors. His command reflected theoretical understanding of emergency protocols without practical experience in the fluid decision-making required when standard procedures proved insufficient for rapidly evolving situations. The operations center erupted into controlled chaos as multiple crises emerged simultaneously throughout the Gulf region. Elena's unexpected behavior had caught 8 naval vessels in various stages of training exercises, each facing unique combinations of positioning, timing, and capability that required individualized emergency responses rather than standardized evacuation procedures. Lieutenant Commander Walsh, monitoring the developing situation from her position in flight operations, recognized immediately that Reynolds' command approach was proving inadequate for the complexity and urgency of the crisis. His reliance on predetermined procedures ignored the fundamental reality that Elena's unprecedented behavior had created conditions requiring innovative solutions that exceeded existing protocols. "Sir," Walsh interrupted Reynolds' manual consultation, "the storm's current track and intensity require immediate implementation of emergency coordination measures beyond standard procedures. We need real-time analysis of positioning options and resource allocation that accounts for Elena's actual behavior rather than predicted patterns." Reynolds' response revealed his inability to adapt standard procedures to unprecedented conditions. Rather than acknowledging the need for innovative approaches, he insisted on following established protocols that had become irrelevant due to Elena's unexpected characteristics, creating dangerous delays while conditions continued deteriorating for the vessels under his coordination responsibility.
The first casualty reports arrived at 0738 hours when the merchant vessel Atlantic Star, caught in Elena's forward bands while attempting to reach protected waters, suffered structural damage from waves exceeding 50 feet in height. The vessel's crew of 32 faced immediate danger as hull breaches compromised watertight integrity faster than emergency repair teams could implement damage control measures. "Mayday! Mayday! This is Atlantic Star." The distress call crackled through storm-generated static. "We are taking on water from multiple hull breaches. Engine room flooding is affecting power generation. Current position places us directly in the storm's path with insufficient time to reach protected anchorage. Request immediate emergency assistance." Reynolds' coordination of rescue operations for the Atlantic Star revealed the full extent of his inexperience with actual emergency situations. His attempts to dispatch Coast Guard assets followed standard procedures that didn't account for Elena's impact on aviation operations, resulting in aircraft assignments that couldn't be executed due to weather conditions that exceeded safe flight parameters. Meanwhile, the USS Challenger's situation continued deteriorating as Elena's forward edge reached the destroyer's position with winds approaching hurricane force and wave heights climbing toward levels that would challenge the vessel's structural integrity. Captain Hayes faced the realization that his ship couldn't outrun the storm and would have to survive Elena's full fury in open water. "All hands, this is the captain," Hayes announced over the ship's communication system. "Hurricane Elena will reach our position within the hour. We are implementing full storm survival procedures. This is not a drill. All personnel report to emergency stations and prepare for conditions that will test every aspect of our seamanship training." The Challenger's crew began emergency preparations that would determine their survival chances during Elena's passage. Loose equipment was secured or jettisoned, watertight doors were sealed, and damage control teams positioned themselves throughout the ship to respond to whatever structural failures the hurricane might cause. Their training had prepared them for severe weather, but Elena's intensity exceeded the design parameters of their survival protocols. At 0847 hours, Elena struck the Challenger with unprecedented fury. Winds exceeding 140 miles per hour created forces that stressed the destroyer's superstructure beyond engineering specifications, while waves measuring over 60 feet crashed across the vessel with impacts that seemed to lift the entire ship before slamming it back into the ocean's surface. The destroyer's hull, designed to withstand combat damage and extreme weather conditions, began showing stress fractures as Elena's power exceeded the limits of human engineering. Navigation equipment failed due to electrical surges caused by lightning strikes. Communication systems suffered damage from antenna structures torn away by hurricane-force winds. And the ship's engines struggled to maintain power generation under conditions that challenged every mechanical system aboard. Captain Hayes's first damage report revealed the extent of Elena's assault on his vessel. Multiple hull breaches in forward compartments, electrical systems compromised throughout the ship, and navigation equipment non-functional due to antenna damage. We are maintaining minimum steerage while implementing damage control procedures, but flooding rates exceed our pumping capacity. The Challenger's communication with Pensacola became increasingly difficult as Elena's electromagnetic effects interfered with radio transmissions, while physical damage to the ship's antenna systems reduced signal strength below reliable levels. Hayes found himself commanding a vessel that was gradually losing the battle against Elena's destructive power, while his ability to coordinate rescue operations diminished with each passing minute. Reynolds' attempts to coordinate emergency response for the Challenger and other vessels caught in Elena's path revealed his complete lack of experience with crisis management under actual combat equivalent conditions. His reliance on standard procedures proved useless when facing situations that exceeded the parameters of existing protocols, creating dangerous delays while vessels throughout the Gulf region faced immediate threats to crew survival. The Atlantic Star's condition continued deteriorating as Elena's full force reached the merchant vessel's position. Emergency pumping systems couldn't keep pace with flooding caused by hull damage that worsened with each massive wave impact, and the crew prepared for abandonment procedures that would place 32 sailors in life rafts during hurricane conditions that made rescue operations virtually impossible. Atlantic Star to any station, we are preparing to abandon ship due to uncontrolled flooding. Storm conditions make helicopter evacuation impossible. We need immediate assistance from surface vessels capable of operating in the current sea state. Reynolds' response to the Atlantic Star's emergency demonstrated his inability to comprehend the practical limitations that Elena's conditions imposed on rescue operations. His dispatch orders for Coast Guard cutters ignored weather restrictions that made surface vessel rescue operations as dangerous as the situations they were supposed to address, creating additional emergencies rather than effective assistance. At 0923 hours, the situation reached crisis proportions when Captain Hayes transmitted the most feared message in naval communications. Pensacola operations, this is Challenger actual. We are experiencing catastrophic flooding in multiple compartments. Hull integrity is compromised beyond our damage control capabilities. We are preparing for possible evacuation procedures, but the current sea state makes rescue operations extremely hazardous. The USS Challenger, one of the Navy's most advanced destroyers, was fighting for survival against natural forces that exceeded every engineering specification built into its design. 200 sailors faced the possibility of abandoning ship into hurricane conditions that would make survival in life rafts virtually impossible, while rescue operations by other vessels risked creating additional casualties rather than effective assistance. Reynolds stood in the operations center, surrounded by communication equipment and weather data that painted a comprehensive picture of the most dangerous naval emergency in the Gulf of Mexico's recorded history. Yet his responses continued following standard procedures that had become irrelevant due to Elena's unprecedented characteristics and the unique combinations of factors affecting each vessel in distress. The crisis demanded innovative coordination that could adapt to rapidly changing conditions while managing multiple emergencies simultaneously across a geographical area where normal rescue assets couldn't operate effectively. Elena had created a situation requiring exactly the type of specialized crisis management that exceeded conventional training and demanded capabilities that remained hidden beneath the surface of routine personnel assignments.
Time was running out for the Challenger and its crew, while Reynolds' inability to provide effective emergency coordination threatened to transform a natural disaster into a military catastrophe that would cost lives through institutional failure to recognize and utilize available capabilities when conventional leadership approaches proved inadequate for the crisis's actual demands. The stage was set for revelation of abilities that had remained concealed beneath operational security requirements and prejudice-based personnel management. Elena's fury would test whether institutional bias or operational competence would prevail when 200 lives depend on decisions that transcended traditional expectations about command authority and crisis management under conditions that challenged the limits of human courage and technical expertise. At 0941 hours, as Hurricane Elena's devastating assault on the USS Challenger reached its crescendo and Commander Reynolds struggled helplessly with procedures that had become obsolete within minutes of the crisis beginning, Captain William Foster burst into the operations center with the authority of someone whose 30-year naval career had taught him to recognize when institutional failure threatened to cost American lives. Foster had been monitoring the deteriorating situation from the base commander's office, watching Reynolds' inadequate response with growing alarm as multiple vessels faced destruction due to coordination failures that violated every principle of effective crisis management. His decision to intervene represented institutional override of failed leadership when operational emergency demanded capabilities that exceeded available command structure. "Commander Reynolds," Foster announced, his voice cutting through the chaos with unmistakable authority. "You are relieved of emergency coordination duties effective immediately. This crisis requires specialized capabilities beyond standard operational parameters." Foster's words carried implications that would end Reynolds' career while potentially saving hundreds of lives through recognition that desperate situations demanded exceptional measures.
Foster's attention turned immediately to Kathy, whose position at her communications workstation had allowed her to monitor every aspect of the developing catastrophe while remaining excluded from Reynolds' failed coordination efforts. Her equipment showed modifications that had been maintaining clearer contact with distressed vessels than any other station in the operations center, suggesting technical capabilities that exceeded standard communications protocols. "Lieutenant Morrison," Foster said, approaching her workstation with the urgency of someone who understood that time measured in minutes could determine whether 200 sailors lived or died. "Your weather analysis predicted Elena's behavior 3 days before official forecasts. Your communication equipment is achieving better contact with distressed vessels than our primary systems. Do you have operational suggestions for coordinating rescue operations under these conditions?" Kathy's response began with the slight hesitation that had characterized her speech throughout her naval career, but Foster's question focused on technical expertise rather than social evaluation, allowing her voice to find the clarity that emerged when she concentrated on operational problems rather than personal anxiety about verbal performance. "Captain," she said, her stutter fading as her mind engaged with the crisis coordination challenges that matched her classified background. "The standard evacuation procedures assume linear storm approach and adequate response time. Elena's rapid intensification and course deviation require adaptive coordination that accounts for real-time condition changes and vessel-specific capabilities." Foster recognized immediately that Kathy's analysis reflected an understanding of crisis management principles that exceeded routine naval training. Her assessment of the situation demonstrated a comprehensive grasp of factors affecting multiple vessels simultaneously, suggesting experience with complex emergency coordination that wasn't documented in her official service record. "What do you recommend for the Challenger's immediate situation?" Foster asked, acknowledging her expertise while granting implicit authorization for her to assume coordination responsibilities that Reynolds had proven incapable of handling effectively. Kathy's transformation was immediate and stunning. Years of operational security that had concealed her true capabilities dissolved as she focused on saving lives through expertise that had been systematically suppressed by prejudice-based leadership. Her voice achieved the natural authority that emerged when mission requirements transcended personal limitations imposed by institutional bias.
The Challenger cannot reach protected waters, but Elena's eyewall structure creates temporary calm periods that allow precision maneuvering, Kathy explained, her analysis incorporating atmospheric dynamics and naval engineering principles that few officers understood comprehensively. Captain Hayes can use these intervals to implement damage control procedures while positioning his vessel for rescue coordination with assets capable of operating in reduced sea states. Foster recognized immediately that Kathy's analysis reflected an understanding of crisis management principles that exceeded routine naval training. Her assessment of the situation demonstrated a comprehensive grasp of factors affecting multiple vessels simultaneously, suggesting experience with complex emergency coordination that wasn't documented in her official service record. "What do you recommend for the Challenger's immediate situation?" Foster asked, acknowledging her expertise while granting implicit authorization for her to assume coordination responsibilities that Reynolds had proven incapable of handling effectively. Kathy's transformation was immediate and stunning. Years of operational security that had concealed her true capabilities dissolved as she focused on saving lives through expertise that had been systematically suppressed by prejudice-based leadership. Her voice achieved the natural authority that emerged when mission requirements transcended personal limitations imposed by institutional bias. The Challenger cannot reach protected waters, but Elena's eyewall structure creates temporary calm periods that allow precision maneuvering, Kathy explained, her analysis incorporating atmospheric dynamics and naval engineering principles that few officers understood comprehensively. Captain Hayes can use these intervals to implement damage control procedures while positioning his vessel for rescue coordination with assets operating in reduced sea states. Her recommendations revealed knowledge of hurricane structure and maritime survival techniques that reflected specialized training in crisis coordination under extreme conditions. Foster realized he was witnessing capabilities that had remained hidden beneath careful operational security, suggesting background in classified programs that prepared personnel for exactly the type of unprecedented emergency they now faced. Kathy's fingers moved across her communication controls with practiced efficiency, implementing equipment modifications that optimized signal strength and clarity for coordination with vessels operating under electromagnetic interference conditions that defeated conventional radio systems. "Challenger Actual, this is storm coordination, Pensacola," Kathy transmitted, using a call sign that seemed to materialize from operational experience that exceeded her apparent background. "I have comprehensive analysis of Elena's structure and can provide precision coordination for damage control and rescue positioning. Confirm your current status and emergency priorities." Captain Hayes's response carried relief that someone finally understood the complexity of his situation and possessed expertise relevant to survival under conditions that challenged every aspect of naval engineering and seamanship. "Storm coordination, Challenger Actual. We have flooding in 3 compartments, power generation at 60%, and navigation systems compromised. Current position places us in Elena's northeast quadrant with winds exceeding design specifications." Kathy's coordination revealed the full extent of her hidden capabilities as she simultaneously managed communication with multiple distressed vessels while accessing weather data, oceanographic information, and vessel specifications that allowed her to develop individualized survival strategies for each unique emergency situation throughout the Gulf region. "Challenger Actual, Elena's eyewall will reach your position in 47 minutes, Kathy transmitted, her voice carrying confidence that inspired trust among crews facing impossible odds. "You will have approximately 90 minutes of reduced wind conditions for emergency repairs and positioning. Implement compartment isolation procedures for sections 7 through 12, maintain minimum steerage on bearing 270, and prepare for rescue coordination with Coast Guard assets approaching from protected waters." Her instructions revealed an understanding of hurricane dynamics, naval engineering, and rescue coordination that exceeded the capabilities of most senior officers with decades of operational experience. Foster observed her performance with amazement as she demonstrated crisis management expertise that had been systematically wasted through Reynolds' prejudice-based personnel decisions. Lieutenant Commander Walsh watched Kathy's transformation from her position in flight operations, finally understanding the true significance of her investigation into Kathy's background. The woman who had been dismissed as unsuitable for leadership roles was demonstrating command presence that exceeded anything Walsh had witnessed during her combat experience in multiple theaters of operation. Kathy's coordination of the Atlantic Star rescue revealed technical knowledge that transcended normal naval training. Her analysis of the merchant vessel's flooding patterns and structural integrity allowed her to develop pumping procedures that stabilized the situation while Coast Guard cutters approached through sea conditions that challenged the limits of surface vessel operations. Atlantic Star storm coordination, Kathy transmitted, her voice maintaining calm authority despite managing multiple life-and-death situations simultaneously. Implement emergency pumping sequence Alpha 79er, concentrate damage control efforts on compartments 4 and 6, and prepare for alongside rescue operations in 38 minutes when sea state allows cutter approach. Her technical instructions incorporated knowledge of merchant vessel systems, damage control procedures, and rescue coordination that suggested extensive experience with maritime emergencies under conditions that exceeded normal operational parameters. The precision of her guidance revealed capabilities that belonged to specialized programs designed for crisis management under extreme circumstances. Master Chief Sullivan observed Kathy's performance with understanding that years of technical experience had prepared him to recognize exceptional competence when institutional prejudice had prevented its recognition. Her equipment modifications and communication protocols reflected knowledge that officially didn't exist at their classification level, confirming his suspicions about her classified background. As Elena's eye approached the Challenger's position, Kathy's coordination reached complexity that would have overwhelmed normal communication specialists. She managed simultaneous rescue operations for 8 vessels while coordinating with Coast Guard assets, Air Force Hurricane reconnaissance aircraft, and naval vessels throughout the Gulf region, all requiring different approaches based on their unique situations and capabilities. All stations, storm coordination, Kathy announced, her voice carrying across multiple radio frequencies to reach every vessel affected by Elena's assault. Eyewall passage begins in 12 minutes. Implement damage control procedures Alpha through Delta, maintain emergency positions as briefed, and prepare for rescue coordination during calm periods. Medical evacuation helicopters will be available for critical casualties once wind conditions permit flight.
Her comprehensive coordination revealed understanding of interagency cooperation, medical evacuation procedures, and resource management that exceeded routine naval experience. Foster realized that Kathy's performance represented capabilities that had been developed through classified programs involving crisis management under conditions that officially remained beyond normal military operations. The moment of truth arrived as Elena's eye reached the Challenger's position, providing the temporary calm that Kathy had predicted with precision that impressed meteorologists monitoring the hurricane from multiple locations. Captain Hayes implemented her damage control procedures with confidence that her guidance reflected expertise relevant to his vessel's survival. Storm coordination, Challenger actual, Hayes transmitted during the eye's passage. Damage control procedures are achieving flood containment beyond our expectations. Your technical recommendations are proving effective for conditions that exceeded our training parameters. We are maintaining structural integrity and preparing for rescue coordination as directed. Kathy's success with the Challenger demonstrated to everyone in the operations center that her capabilities extended far beyond what any standard personnel evaluation had suggested. Her coordination had transformed certain disasters into manageable emergencies through technical expertise and crisis management that revealed background in specialized operations that remained classified above most security clearances. The rescue operations continued throughout Elena's passage as Kathy coordinated helicopter evacuations, surface vessel assistance, and damage control procedures that saved every life threatened by the hurricane's unprecedented assault on naval operations in the Gulf of Mexico. Her performance exceeded every expectation about what constituted effective leadership under pressure. Lieutenant Sarah Chen documented Kathy's technical achievements during the crisis, recognizing that her communication protocols and equipment modifications had achieved coordination effectiveness that established new standards for emergency response under extreme conditions. Her innovations would influence naval communication procedures for decades, while proving that exceptional capabilities could remain hidden beneath surface characteristics that masked extraordinary potential.
Commander Torres observed the rescue operations with understanding that Kathy's performance had revealed the magnitude of Reynolds' professional incompetence and the institutional failure that had wasted military assets through prejudice-based personnel management. Her success demonstrated that effective leadership transcended traditional expectations about command presence and verbal authority. As Elena's wins diminished and rescue operations reached successful completion, the operations center fell silent, except for the routine communications traffic that confirmed every sailor had survived the most dangerous naval emergency in Gulf Coast history. Kathy's coordination had achieved what seemed impossible, guiding 8 vessels and over 400 personnel through conditions that challenged the limits of human courage and technical expertise. Captain Foster approached Kathy's workstation, where she was completing operational reports with the same methodical precision she had brought to routine administrative duties. But her transformation during the crisis had revealed capabilities that changed everything about how her colleagues understood both her background and her potential for future assignments requiring specialized expertise. "Lieutenant Morrison," Foster said, his voice carrying respect that acknowledged extraordinary performance under conditions that tested human limits. "That was exceptional crisis coordination. Your technical expertise and command presence exceeded anything I've witnessed during 30 years of naval service. How long have you been qualified for specialized emergency coordination under extreme conditions?" Kathy's response revealed the background that had remained hidden beneath carefully maintained operational security and institutional prejudice that had prevented recognition of her true value to naval operations. The revelation struck the operations center like lightning, as personnel realized they had witnessed systematic harassment of someone whose qualifications exceeded anything in their understanding of naval specialization programs. Kathy wasn't just another communications officer struggling with speech impediments. She was specialized personnel whose expertise had just saved hundreds of lives during conditions that officially exceeded normal survival parameters. 6 months after Hurricane Elena's devastating assault on the Gulf of Mexico, Lieutenant Kathy Morrison stood before the Senate Armed Services Committee in a secure briefing room beneath the Capitol building, delivering testimony that would fundamentally reshape how the United States military approached personnel evaluation, crisis management, and the recognition of exceptional capabilities that operated beneath institutional assumptions about leadership and command authority. Her voice, clear and confident, carried across the committee chamber without any trace of the stutter that had once defined how others perceived her limitations. The transformation wasn't medical or therapeutic, it was environmental. When Kathy operated in contexts that valued her expertise rather than evaluating her social performance, her communication reflected the natural authority that had always existed beneath anxiety-driven speech patterns triggered by prejudicial assessment situations. Kathy explained to senators whose decisions affected military policy at the highest levels. Traditional personnel evaluation methods focus exclusively on conventional presentations, while systematically overlooking operational capabilities that prove essential during crisis situations. My experience demonstrates that speech characteristics, when properly understood, often indicate enhanced analytical abilities and stress management techniques that become invaluable when conventional leadership approaches prove inadequate. Senator Patricia Hamilton, chairwoman of the Military Personnel Subcommittee, had been following Kathy's case since the Elena rescue brought her capabilities to congressional attention. The systematic harassment Kathy endured at Pensacola had exposed institutional flaws that allowed qualified personnel to be marginalized based on surface characteristics rather than comprehensive evaluation of their actual operational value. Lieutenant Morrison's coordination during Hurricane Elena saved 437 naval personnel while managing the most complex maritime emergency in Gulf Coast history. Yet, she had been systematically excluded from leadership opportunities by supervisors who confused personal bias with professional assessment. This represents institutional failure that compromises our military effectiveness while wasting human resources that could prove crucial during national emergencies. The Elena rescue had generated detailed after-action reports that documented every aspect of Kathy's performance, creating comprehensive evidence of capabilities that exceeded standard naval training by margins that defied conventional measurement. Her coordination techniques, weather analysis accuracy, and crisis management effectiveness had established new benchmarks for emergency response under extreme conditions. Admiral Rebecca Chen, Chief of Naval Operations, had personally reviewed the Elena documentation while conducting her own investigation into the institutional failures that had allowed Reynolds' harassment campaign to continue without intervention. Chen's background included combat command experience that taught her to recognize when personnel evaluations reflected institutional bias rather than operational competence. The Elena incident revealed systematic problems with leadership assessment and supervisory authority that extend throughout our military personnel systems. Commander Reynolds' treatment of Lieutenant Morrison represented not just individual prejudice, but institutional blindness to capabilities that saved lives when conventional approaches failed completely. Reynolds' military career had ended with court-martial proceedings that revealed the full extent of his professional incompetence and abuse of authority. His case became a cautionary example used in leadership training programs throughout the military, illustrating how personal bias and limited understanding could result in waste of critical capabilities during emergencies that demand optimal utilization of available human resources.
The court-martial evidence had exposed Reynolds' systematic exclusion of qualified personnel based on characteristics that had no bearing on operational effectiveness. His documentation showed patterns of harassment designed to advance his career through the appearance of strict standards while actually compromising mission readiness through waste of specialized capabilities that his own limitations prevented him from recognizing. Captain William Foster, promoted to admiral following his intervention during the Elena crisis, implemented policy changes designed to prevent qualified personnel from being marginalized by supervisors whose own inadequacies made them incapable of recognizing subordinates' actual value. Foster's reforms emphasized operational competence over traditional presentation styles, creating evaluation systems that identified capabilities regardless of how they manifested. Effective military leadership requires recognizing excellence wherever it appears, Admiral Foster explained during congressional testimony. Lieutenant Morrison's rescue coordination proved that exceptional capabilities often operate beneath characteristics that superficial evaluation methods mistake for limitations. Our personnel systems must evolve to identify and develop potential that doesn't conform to conventional expectations. Kathy's new assignment placed her in charge of developing crisis management protocols for naval operations worldwide, utilizing expertise that had been revealed during Elena to create systems capable of handling emergencies that exceeded standard response capabilities. Her work involved classified programs that prepared military personnel for situations where conventional training proved inadequate. The specialized equipment Kathy developed for extreme weather communications became standard issue for naval vessels operating in regions prone to severe atmospheric conditions. Her modifications improved coordination effectiveness while maintaining compatibility with existing technology, proving that innovation often emerged from personnel whose backgrounds provided unique perspectives on operational challenges that stumped conventional approaches. Lieutenant Commander Patricia Walsh, promoted following her role in documenting Reynolds' harassment and protecting Kathy's capabilities during the institutional crisis, became Kathy's primary assistant in developing personnel assessment methods that identified exceptional potential among military members who had been overlooked by traditional evaluation systems. Working with Kathy taught me that assumptions about limitations often reveal more about the evaluator than the person being assessed, Walsh reflected during an interview for a military leadership publication. Her rescue coordination during Elena proved that stuttering doesn't prevent someone from commanding complex operations with precision that saves lives under conditions that would overwhelm conventional leadership approaches. Master Chief Robert Sullivan, whose technical expertise had recognized Kathy's exceptional capabilities before the Elena crisis, implemented her assessment recommendations throughout naval communications training programs. His reforms created evaluation protocols that identified operational potential among personnel whose qualifications had been underestimated based on communication styles, physical characteristics, or other factors that proved irrelevant to actual job performance. The sailors Kathy guided to safety during Elena became advocates for personnel policies that recognized diverse forms of military excellence. Captain Robert Hayes, whose destroyer had been saved through her coordination expertise, requested Kathy's consultation for subsequent operations requiring crisis management under challenging conditions that exceeded routine naval training parameters. Storm Coordination's voice cut through chaos with authority that inspired confidence when everything seemed hopeless. Hayes explained during the congressional hearing honoring Kathy's contributions. Her guidance was so precise and knowledgeable that we never doubted our survival chances, even during conditions that exceeded our vessel's design specifications. The Elena rescue had demonstrated conclusively that effective crisis management required capabilities that transcended traditional command presence and verbal authority. Kathy's performance proved that exceptional leadership could emerge from personnel whose strengths operated beneath surface characteristics that conventional evaluation methods misinterpreted as professional limitations. Dr. Jennifer Park, the meteorologist who had observed Kathy's weather prediction capabilities, collaborated with her on developing atmospheric analysis techniques that improved hurricane forecasting accuracy for military operations throughout regions prone to severe weather events. Their work created early warning systems that provided additional response time for evacuation and protective procedures. Morrison's weather analysis incorporated factors that weren't considered in standard forecasting protocols, Dr. Park explained during a National Weather Service conference. Her predictions consistently exceeded official forecast accuracy because her background included experience with classified atmospheric research that enhanced understanding of storm behavior under conditions that challenged conventional meteorological theory. The communication techniques Kathy developed during her classified operations continued influencing military technology development, with her innovations becoming incorporated into systems that support global operations requiring precision coordination under conditions that tested human endurance and technological capability limits. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, whose technical observations had contributed to recognizing Kathy's exceptional equipment expertise, implemented training programs based on Kathy's maintenance procedures and system optimization techniques. Chen's programs produced communication specialists whose technical competence exceeded previous standards while reducing equipment failure rates during operational deployments. Lieutenant Morrison's technical knowledge transformed our understanding of what communication equipment could achieve under adverse conditions, Chen reported during a naval technology conference. Her modifications consistently improved performance beyond manufacturer specifications while maintaining complete safety compliance, proving that innovation often comes from personnel whose experience exceeds documented training records. The intelligence community's recognition of Kathy's crisis management capabilities led to consultation requests for developing response protocols for classified operations involving coordination challenges that exceeded standard military training. Commander Michael Torres, whose flight operations experience had helped recognize Kathy's exceptional coordination abilities, created aviation support procedures based on her multi-platform management techniques. Torres's innovations improved aircraft coordination during complex operations while reducing mission failure rates in challenging environmental conditions. Kathy's personal transformation reflected the professional recognition that acknowledged her true capabilities rather than focusing on characteristics that had been systematically misinterpreted as career limitations. Her confidence flourished as assignments challenged her expertise rather than marginalizing her potential, demonstrating that human development reaches optimal levels when institutional support matches individual capabilities with appropriate responsibilities. The Morrison family farm in Nebraska became a destination for military personnel seeking to understand how exceptional capabilities could develop in environments that valued intellectual achievement while providing support for overcoming personal challenges. Kathy's parents, Thomas and Linda Morrison, hosted visitors who wanted to learn about educational approaches that recognized potential regardless of how it manifested during conventional assessment procedures. Kathy's always possessed remarkable analytical abilities, Thomas Morrison explained to a delegation of military educators. Her communication difficulties were anxiety responses to evaluation situations, not fundamental limitations on her intellectual capabilities.
When she focused on problems that engaged her analytical thinking, her speech flowed naturally with confidence that reflected her true competence. The Cedar Rapids community celebrated Kathy's achievements as proof that small-town education systems could produce military excellence that exceeded urban institutional advantages. Her success inspired local students whose own challenges had made them question their potential for significant achievement, demonstrating that apparent limitations often conceal extraordinary capabilities waiting for appropriate recognition and development.
Military academies throughout the United States implemented admission procedures based on Kathy's recommendations for identifying potential that operated beneath surface characteristics. Her evaluation methods discovered exceptional candidates among applicants who had been overlooked by traditional selection processes that emphasized conventional presentations over analytical capabilities and operational potential. The Elena Rescue documentation became required study material for military leadership courses worldwide, illustrating how institutional bias could waste critical capabilities during emergencies that demanded optimal utilization of available human resources. Kathy's story proved that effective crisis management required recognizing excellence wherever it appeared, regardless of how it conformed to traditional expectations about military bearing and command presence. Young military personnel entering specialized training programs studied Kathy's crisis coordination as an example of technical excellence combined with moral courage that achieved mission success under circumstances that challenged every assumption about human limitations and institutional effectiveness. Her legacy demonstrated that military excellence emerged when organizations created environments where exceptional potential could flourish, rather than being suppressed by narrow definitions of professional suitability. Kathy's influence extended beyond individual achievement to encompass systematic changes in how military organizations evaluated personnel, assigned responsibilities, and developed capabilities that might prove essential during national emergencies requiring innovative approaches to unprecedented challenges. Her experience proved that institutional improvement demanded willingness to challenge assumptions about human potential, while recognizing that excellence often appeared in forms that defied conventional expectations. The Storm Coordination call sign became synonymous with precision crisis management throughout the global military community, with personnel requesting specialized training based on Kathy's protocols and methodologies. Her techniques influenced emergency response procedures that enhanced operational effectiveness for units requiring exceptional coordination under conditions that exceeded standard training parameters. As Kathy concluded her congressional testimony, her words carried implications that would shape military policy for generations. True leadership excellence requires recognizing that human capabilities often exceed surface appearances, and that institutional effectiveness depends on developing potential rather than dismissing it based on incomplete understanding of individual qualifications. The Elena Rescue proved that voices once considered inadequate could guide others through darkness toward safety, and that apparent weaknesses might conceal extraordinary strengths waiting for the right moment to save lives through courage that transcended every assumption about what constitutes command authority under pressure. The transformation was complete. Lieutenant Kathy Morrison had proven that stammering didn't diminish strength, that surface characteristics often masked exceptional abilities, and that true military excellence emerged when institutions possess the wisdom to recognize that human potential frequently exceeded conventional expectations about what individuals could achieve when given opportunities to demonstrate capabilities that had been waiting for crisis conditions to reveal their life-saving power. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.